Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast in which Michael and Ivanka discuss grand topics.
And it's a therapy session really more than, and this isn't really about you, dear listener, this is about us. Or is it? You decide.
That's a good thing. It's a weekly podcast in which Michael and Ivanka build on their friendship.
We're a friendship based on sounding boarding. I quite like that. I quite like that verb. We're sounding boarding. What's your name?
My name is Ivanka Magic.
And my name is Michael Forrest. And this week we are talking about democracy.
Democracy.
We wanted to do something we could get angry about after last week's was a little sort of...
Yeah, sombre, you said.
A little
I think that's
sombre,
a good description.
Yeah, a little sleepy. Democratic subjects. I think, obviously, we probably have to refer to Churchill's quote that, democracy is the worst form of government apart from all the other ones. I think that's hard not to... for me to not agree with.
We should mention that there's a local election coming up.
Yes.
I think that's quite important because we like to encourage people to participate in the democratic process.
Or do we?
We do.
Okay, let's get into it, shall we?
There's loads of things.
Let's get into it. There's a lot of subjects. We may not be teasing them all here. Often it seems that our teasers don't actually pan out in the actual episode, so they're pretty empty. But let's do this. Let's do it. So how's your week, Ivanka?
My week has been characterised by camping, sick child, sore shoulder, and that's it. That'll do
done.
me.
I did my tax return yesterday. I'm feeling very smug about that because it's still only April. Last year's I did only this February, so I'm feeling pretty good about this year's, and got a good rebate. But then I realised that it makes no difference. Because Michael has been pursuing his dreams, hence getting not paid for a year. But I did on the back of that, I think I've been quite inspired by your tireless promotional efforts that I kind of think I need to try and milk a bit more value out of some of the projects I did, a lot of the projects that I did last year, which I probably didn't. I probably posted up once or twice, and then I was like, well,
and no one likes it.
This is stale now. What's the point? Or maybe it kind of took off a little bit, but then died down again. But then I never gave it another push. So, and also, just some little, maybe minor tweaks to some existing projects could yield better results than starting 15 new ones. Although I have got some new ones as well.
My biggest problem is my sore shoulder. It's really making it quite uncomfortable to sit at a computer. So I've been trying to use my mouse in my left hand. Well, it's not a mouse, it's a trackpaddy thing. Is
there a cause of this sore shoulder, or?
I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't know why my shoulder is sore. It's probably something to do with sitting at the computer.
Too much programming.
Too much not moving in front of a screen.
Have you considered a standing desk?
I have, but this just is not practical in my life right now.
No.
And I don't think it's to do with standing. I think it's to do with overreaching. I don't know.
Have you considered a giant bouncy ball?
I've done that before.
I did have one. I actually binned it recently. I was like, sorry, Earth, but it was just like I was like, I never want to see that again. But I do have a standing desk here, which has a button to go up and down, but it doesn't work. And now I've just kind of resigned myself to it, just staying where it is, which is sad because it was cool being able to sort of stand up, sit down.
Yeah, I have a stand-up, sit-down desk. I used to have one, but that was when work paid for it. Because they're quite expensive.
Oh, it's like €500 in IKEA. I got this for.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a big
then
desk.
I might revisit.
I feel like I did a lot of things this week. So basically, I celebrate the anniversary of my last therapy session with Robert Lewis, our mutual therapist at one point. By having a day I call Change Day. It's a day that I push myself over the edge if I've got something that I sort of feel like I should do or want to do. and it's the day on which I make a decision. And 4 years ago, that was I'm going to move to Berlin. This year, I've been in the sort of midst of, slightly problematic work situation, and my usual impulse is to just sort of quit and just find something else because I can't be bothered. But I thought this year my change will be not to have a big change and stick with it for a bit longer. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm going on record as don't do a big change and just stick with it.
Wow. And
Imagine
that's the change.
Yes,
what's the date of this? Is it
the 26th of...
Do you know... Should I tell you something interesting about the 26th of April?
It's your birthday.
No, it's the anniversary of my father's death.
Oh, wow.
It's a significant date all round.
Yeah. Well, let's start celebrating it every year by doing something nuts.
Doing something good.
What's the point of democracy?
To have a society that reflects the will of the people, which I think is a
representation, isn't it? It's like you want everyone, instead of an autocracy or other kinds of autocracy. I didn't know the word plutocracy until this week. I was reading Richard Stallman's website, for better or worse. Plutocracy is a society basically controlled by the rich, which is basically kind of more like what we're in than necessarily a democracy per se.
So I watched last night, as part of my research preparation, I watched a BBC documentary about the allies of the suffragettes and suffragists, so men who supported the women's suffrage movement, which raised an interesting question about the conflicts within the Labour Party, because people like Keir Hardie, he supported the women's suffrage movement, and they're in, Labour the Labour Party itself would support universal suffrage, so everybody's engagement in democracy. But I think what's interesting about that, if you look at today's society, is there's being allowed to participate in democracy, i.e. having the right to vote. Then there's actually using your vote. There's going to vote with little or no engagement, then there's not going to vote at all. There is voting now we've got this whole factor of being misled deliberately.
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of us, the process of voting in an election is you kind of got a couple of leaflets through the door, and that's all you've sort of skimmed them, and you've barely had time to do anything else about it. And you don't really know anything about the person that's actually representing you in your area or any of these people. And then you go like, okay, I guess this one.
Yeah, this one's got my badge.
It takes a lot to do any more than that. Seems like, I'm terrible. Like, I don't know who is running for this coming up thing. I don't know what they're about. I don't know, I don't know anything about them. So it's like... Okay, well, I guess I'm just going to see the red one or the yellow one. I don't know.
The yellow one? No, the
UKIP one is what I mean by that, obviously. Wait, isn't it? Yeah.
But that, I think, so I've got two angles to that, which I think really. So I certainly, I started off my political engagement in this country with I vote for the red ones, and that's that. And I don't really, I take a great deal of pride in voting for the red ones, and because Brighton and Hove used to be completely blue. For American listeners, blue is the Conservatives here. We're like the other way around from you lot. But
red is Labour. Yellow, I was actually meaning Liberal Democrats.
I know.
But I think UKIP also, who the bad party, but they seem to have... Are they still around?
Bad party, yeah, they're around. The purple.
Well, it's because it used to be BNP and now it's UKIP. So yeah. I know.
But we're all interested. So I used to go, to vote in really Tory area, wearing red head to toe, making it very clear who I was.
Like a
you know,
tracksuit.
Woo! No, I used to have red jeans and a red t-shirt.
Well, one of those people.
Yeah. Like, this is what you do when you're 18 and you get to vote for the first time, isn't it? So then over the years I've got more and more engaged, and I do read and I do find out. And I think my engagement really started once Tony Blair took us to war. Then I really started reading, because I had this sort of trust relationship. I'll vote red, then of course they will make the policies happen that align with my values. So therefore, you know, I'm sort of going, there you go, you've got my vote, now carry on, run the country the way I expect it to be run. And then, so I think Tony Blair taking us to war was my big, no, you've got to actually engage a bit more. But then I've also got this Balkan, the end of Yugoslavia, the first democratic elections, which is now still in place on the Balkans. That the badges are different. The badges are they're, instead of them being down the lines of Labour, Conservative, whatever, they are really down national lines. There's very few people who are voting for. They're not. You won't find somebody of a Serb nationality and a Croat nationality living in the same ex-Yugoslav country voting for the same party. Highly unlikely.
So it's quite tribal still.
Very, very tribal. And then there are supposedly now. It's just very complicated. It is complicated, but also extremely simple. So there's a small percentage of people, like everywhere, who are engaged in politics and vote on policy and vote on their values. And then there is a majority, like I'm sure there is here, who just go, well, I'm Labour, I vote Labour. But in their case, it'll be I'm, Croat something or Bosnian something, and they'll vote for that. So I find that's, and to me, this label badge voting is a reason against democracy, because I don't think people at all... they're not voting for representation, they're voting for their gang, their team.
So this is, I think, the referendum, corrupted things a little bit, hasn't it? Democracy is about choosing a representative. So it makes sense that you would choose a member of your tribe who kind of knows how you think, and you choose someone that's going to be responsible and experienced enough to be able to make your argument and kind of make decisions as needed on your behalf. That's not the same as the general public making decisions.
No.
Right, about specific things like membership of the EU. Where on the one hand, you're capable of saying, okay, I trust this person's from my gang, this person thinks like me close enough of all the options. So the decision that people can perfectly reasonably make is, do I know this person, do I trust this person to represent me? A decision that someone needs a little bit more kind of research and experience and knowledge and information to be able to make is, should we be a member of the EU? Should we go to war? Should we? I mean, to conflate those two things, democracy isn't referendums.
No.
Well, in its current state, and I don't know, and I can go two ways on this. I think it's, I kind of want a professional politician to be, someone that knows how to do it, because I don't know enough about it, and I don't know what everyone else thinks enough in order to, people aren't, I guess if you kind of got elected in something, suddenly you're getting all the letters and all the tweets, and you kind of start to get a pretty good idea. If we start micromanaging our politicians, then that gets weird, doesn't it?
Well, this is the whole... I don't necessarily think that people understand what representational democracy really means. Both sides. I think some MPs represent themselves, and some constituents. It's like it's that. What you made me think of was the fact that, which shows that I wasn't listening properly, but looking at when I could interject. Now it's my turn to speak.
I think this podcast should be called "What You Made Me Think Of," rather than.
That's true. What you made me think of was this thing that I was thinking about the other day. When I was in school in Yugoslavia, we learned about the existence of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the United Kingdom. And the classroom laughed. They were like, Lords. That is hilarious. Fancy there being a House of Lords in this day and age. Like people that aren't elected. So all these people that, voted Brexit and because sovereignty, House of Lords. If you've got unelected people in a position where they can potentially block any law that comes through the House where elected representatives are pushing through a law, for example. There is a nice diagram somewhere which I'll find which shows how a law, how many times it has to get debated and then it goes through and then it ends up in the House of Lords and the House of Lords can send it back for corrections or let it through, blah, blah, or block it or whatever. But they're not elected representatives of ours. But there have been laws going through recently that I've been very glad that there is a chance that the House of Lords will at least hinder them a bit. So it's like the grown-ups can step in because they don't have to pander to elected, to the electorate. So it's
a double-edged sword, isn't it? Democracy. It is. And you sort of... At a certain point, there's no substitute for experience and judgment. Unfortunately, there's a lot of temptations for corruption as well. And so it's a very complicated... Is it a delicately balanced machine or is it a mishmashed hack of nonsense that just sort of barely works, if it even does?
I don't know. I think living in Britain, until recently, I did live in the delusion that it all sort of rubbed along quite well. And, sometimes we swung a little bit more to the right and then sometimes we swung a little bit more to the left. But overall, we sort of towed some sort of middle ground that was broadly inoffensive.
Yeah, I thought we were kind of harmless. Like converging. Like when people were like, oh, there's no, people are like, oh, kind of moderate left, there weren't really any extreme left or right people so much anymore. Everyone's kind of converging to the centre. And then you'd have people complaining about that. And I'd think, well, doesn't that mean we're just sort of starting to kind of come to an agreement about... Because this isn't about... I mean, debate is part of this and having an opposing kind of opinion about everything or the chance for someone to kind of present the opposing opinion in a debate is one thing. But when that just becomes... When it's like, okay, well, here's a good idea. Like, if everyone could just recognise a good idea, what has left and right got to do with that? And that's what I never really quite internalised was, it's about, like, here's the idea, let's discuss it. If everyone just kind of could listen to the idea on its merits and it was less about, okay, being whipped to kind of vote a certain way because that's the party line, I think things would, be more democratic, Yeah.
I think there are a couple of things that shouldn't be put to a vote. They should be put to a debate of experts. So things like IT policies or, but then I do know that there is ideology behind IT policies as well. Like, there isn't one right and one wrong. There is a scale. So, like my on the one hand, I think I would like it, or when it comes to medicine, like the NHS being a public service, therefore not being left or, like if we all agree in the existence of the NHS, then what the medical decision should be left away from politics, like the National Institute for Clinical Excellence gang, the clinicians should be making these decisions. But money always comes into it, and as soon as money comes into it, then policy comes into it because taxation comes into it because But so this sort of ideology aspect or leadership acts. I think it's leadership.
Yeah, leadership is a whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think though you're voting in a democracy, you're voting for representatives, and you're voting for people to, in our case, to fill a House of Parliament and have a chat and have a debate with each other and put things forward, and they all argue and then they vote and But they are each of our MPs represents us, and so therefore we have every right, and we should keep writing to them, keep telling them what we need to know.
I need to start doing this, don't I? I need to start communicating with my representative. That's what we have to do, isn't it?
Well, I did. It is. We have to communicate with our representative.
I've only just realised right now that's my line, and then I'll hear them say something I wrote to them in the House of Commons and be like, "Hey, that was my idea."
Because they don't need. They haven't got loads of ideas. I was listening to Stella Creasy on Guilty Feminist talking about the fact that they literally get tens of thousands of tweets and emails and letters and so therefore. It is a drop in the ocean, potentially, but somebody will still be classifying those. And joining pressure groups is also very, like I listened to this documentary last night and they were talking about, they had a voice recording of Emmeline Pankhurst's daughter saying, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have the exact quote, but it was basically, the great thing that my mother had was the conviction in this one thing, this one issue that for her was more important than anything else, so she could put all her energy behind this one issue and express it in ways that everybody could understand. And for me, I think my biggest weakness as any sort of activist, or what stops me being any sort of useful activist, is that I can't pick a cause.
Well, I mean,
it's really, there seems to be so many causes at the moment. So I am a member of the Labour Party and I am a member of the Fawcett Society. I do give money to a couple of charities, but it's like I have really, by becoming a member of the Fawcett Society, at least hung my money off women's issues as being a sort of, is it linchpin? Is that the right word? That's sort of like, if we can sort this out, many other things will get sorted out. So they do act, but they are not a political party. They do research. They're a campaigning group. They pick out and provide good research and policy advice on issues that affect women. And as we've discussed a million times before, the things that are known true facts proven by science are that if you sort life out for women, then the rest of the society gets lifted as well. So what Stella Creasy was saying is that when she sees a pressure group, like she's on her way into Parliament and she sees somebody, or they've arranged a meeting with her, or then she can join forces with them and help those, as a politician, she can help these groups. They can work together to achieve something. So but you're being vociferous about what you care about is important, because all this kind of like, politicians are the same, it doesn't make any difference whatever I do, it does make difference if you participate.
I think there's some good media on democracy. Some good things I've seen. We've been watching Parks and Recreation.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very good. And there's a good line about Leslie Knope is the protagonist in sort of in government, like in the Parks Department. And there's this, the police chief says she gets any favours she needs because she's the sort of person that uses favours to help other people. And I thought that was an excellent summary of what made her a good person. Then The West Wing. Have you seen The West Wing?
No.
Okay, that's a great sort of like, this is what democracy could be. This is like if you had very kind of strident, articulate, intelligent people debating and talking about things. And that's very compelling in that they also get very hard problems thrown at them all the time as well. And it's just, it's a beautiful thing it's American politics, obviously, but it's something that if anyone hasn't seen, then they should go and watch.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things about it, but I haven't watched it.
Well, it's good. It's long as well. And then finally, there's a great YouTube channel, Jay Foreman's YouTube channel, and he has a great handful of videos called Politics Unboringed, where he sort of explains how the House of Commons works and things like that. And it's very good. So I'd recommend having a look at that, if you're not sure what's going on.
One of them that I like is Simple Politics.
Oh, I haven't seen. Is that a YouTube?
Have Twitters and Facebooks and website. I don't know about YouTube. They do kind of fun quizzes, and I think they do some good work. they try and be. I think they try to be, down the middle. It's more about politics than it is about any particular side. I think it's this concept of sides that's odd. It's like, even our House of Commons is laid out where we've got, it's laid out to have Labour Party versus Conservatives. That's how it's laid out. And it's like, it's laid out to have two parties duking it out.
Or like
over
one,
table.
it's laid out to have a majority and then everyone else, right?
Yeah, I suppose. But it's two sides. It's
two sides, but it's actually, it's the majority and then...
Yeah, and then the
rest of them, right? That's what it should be seen. Not like Labour versus Conservative. It's
where do DUP sit? Do they sit on the Conservative side?
Probably.
Anyway, but it's just designed for this. Like, now you said, no, it's your turn.
The Honourable Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman will remember that I totally pwned him last week, the twat.
So it's all a bit laid out to be about confrontation instead of being about making some things better.
And there were reasons for that. There were reasons for it being designed like that. Because I think before that, when there was just a king, then there wasn't any debate. So it's kind of set up to encourage debates and kind of disagreements, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I get because at the time that it was created, that was just never happening. But now it's sort of like, okay, well, it doesn't only have to be about that. Sometimes you can just, kind of come to an agreement and figure out the right thing to do.
I mentioned my sister's fostering quite a lot, but she gives some amazing statistics about the number of people so 1% of the population go through care. Of the prison population, 50% of them have been in care. Something like 23% of children who are looked after, only 23% have qualifications or leave care or leave school with some qualifications. That means... so they're, like if you've got not a single GCSE, nothing to your name, then of course you're going to be 50% of the prison population. It's like we're just not looking after. And then you've got this tax credit cut, which is, any more than 2 children and you can't have tax credits, which is, it's like, I don't understand that rationale at all.
So who's representing these people? Are they just...
Nobody cares about them, basically. Just go, well, you can die 12 years earlier and you lot can just go to prison, because your parents were shit. It's not your fault, but, it's not our fault either. So off you trot.
Well, this is why absolutely everyone needs to vote, isn't it? Because all those people need to be actively voting so that the people who want to get into power need to do right by them. There needs to be energy in to kind of have energy out, right?
Yes, there does. And so there's a couple of things. One is they actually, thankfully, are a very small percentage of the population. I think what's more important is what you said when we were, I think, media, whenever one of the other podcasts, when you talked about that we should vote as though everything's going to go wrong in our lives instead of that everything's going to be fine and we're going to be Bill Gates. I think that's one thing, because we need to represent the people who or we need to support the people who need more backing, who need more representation, like
who will be us, who are very likely to be us at some point. And don't forget that. But it takes a bit of imagination to understand that you might suddenly fall ill.
And I think that's one of the things that's why people don't want to think about children in care or rough sleepers. You get these, because I worked at the council a bit, I saw some of the responses people give when they do a council satisfaction survey, and they're like, all these rough sleepers, you should make a platform off the cut, just make them sleep out at sea. I don't want to see them. And I think part of the reason people get angry and nasty about things like that is because they feel upset and because they don't want to think about the scenario. Though I said this to somebody on Tuesday and she was like, I think you're being a bit kind to them. I was like, well, I'm a bit like that sometimes.
I think there's fight. So what we keep saying is if you do this from the ground up, if you kind of focus on the most difficult, on the weakest members of society and kind of bring them up, bring education up, bring care up, bring, health services up for those people. In the medium to long term, your whole country is going to be just so much better off.
Yeah.
Sometimes could it be just the fact that we do have this short time scale in which to demonstrate that you've achieved something of 5 years? That means that everything is geared towards, okay, what's going to get me the most bang for my buck? Which is often, obviously can be a big deal, but it just discourages the sort of long plan. Yeah. And that just happens everywhere, doesn't it?
Totally. To get serious social care improvement, you need 20 years. And nobody's going to get elected. And that's why,
And also, it works the other way around. If you cancel stuff, it kind of takes a while for the effects of that to become apparent too.
Well, it's like trying to get work done on social care in local government is really hard because the thing everybody complains about all the time is parking and rubbish collection. Because that is, I walk out my front door, my rubbish hasn't been collected. I'm going to complain. Oh, I can't park my car. The parking's too expensive. Blah blah. Too many cars. Whatever. These are the things. So these are the things that get attention because the elected officials. That's what they're going to get elected on. Whether or not there's been a good bit of rubbish collection and whether the parking's reasonable.
No, it's visible. It's I've improved this by a little bit. So. Cool.
So, vote on that, but don't forget to vote on, the chance that maybe you get some horrible incurable disease, which means you can't work, and suddenly, maybe not in a week or 2 weeks or a month, but in 6 months to a year, suddenly you need help. And it's hard, and we don't want to think about it, but.
And it works for foreign policy as well, like that Facebook thing that was going around that said, look, you just killed this kid's entire family. Don't be surprised when he comes and blows himself up in Waitrose in, 10 years' time. You can't make those connections. It wasn't Waitrose, it was something else. But
I was going to say, are you picking on the John Lewis partnership at the moment?
Where was
Serves them right for advertising in the Daily Mail.
I googled universal basic income this week and saw that Finland had sort of backpedaled on that because they were doing it, but they've stopped. And the reason they've said is because even though, everyone's up for it, it's expensive, but it doesn't seem to, there's the culture of kind of trying to pay as little tax as possible is still there. So even with the fact that you'll get a lot of it back now, so they've sort of given up on it, and then that someone's done some sort of calculations on how much it would cost to do it here. But I think I part of me thinks well, yeah, it's going to take a while. Maybe there could be a cultural shift if it kind of got a bit longer to bed in, or maybe it just wouldn't. Maybe people will always kind of go to whatever the lowest amount of tax you can possibly pay. Or maybe they needed to simplify how taxation works before giving up on it. But I just feel like they've kind of done something in the short term and then they sort of reneged on it because there was some problems in the short term that I just wonder if, sometimes you've got to kind of carry that conviction through and try some things. But then you run out of money and then, you can't do anything. So I don't know.
I think there is definitely a problem in the way we've got the election system and the years, or because the logic of limiting people's time in power or taking that to be retested is good logic. Because it stops it getting and the fact that the America land has that you can only do 2 terms as president, all cool, limits power, good. But it also limits longevity. So I would love to think that there are a few things that you could pull away from, have them on a separate work stream from elections. It's like, so on the subject, you mentioned earlier about the feeling that we're all sort of coming together on certain things, so let's say we all come together on the idea that that the NHS is non-partisan, it's got nothing to do left, right, up, down, it's just a thing that we want as a country, and it sits on its own stream and it's untouchable. It's like, or I don't know. I'm trying to think of something because I think
or it can't be politicized.
No,
is what you mean.
That's So it's like everybody's responsible for looking after it, keeping it strong, keeping us well, keeping the staff happy and productive. Whatever like
in America, the healthcare providers get paid when people get sick. Instead, they should get paid when people don't get sick.
Well, there was that article the other day about. Some big pharmaceutical or something having a strategy meeting. It leaked. It got shared. I don't know about the cost to business of people recovering from conditions. They kind of want them to bimble along, being a bit ill, constantly taking tablets, rather than getting better, because that's not good for business.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's the underlying. And of course, I don't think that's illogical for a company that makes money out of producing drugs. Why would they want anyone to get better?
Well,
now, yeah. I am sure that 90% of their operations is not done like that. I'm willing to believe not everyone's evil, but I can certainly understand why at a board level they would be having that debate. Why are we doing this again?
Once you start just looking at the numbers, then and you sort of dehumanize everything, and the trouble is that's how the energy flows, isn't it? In these things, it's how the potential energy, everything sort of rests at the lowest possible. There's capitalism at work. It's like it has no empathy. It doesn't care about the people involved. All it cares about is the bottom line. And I don't want to. And it's like, be that guy,
but so even if you remove yourself away from the NHS, let's take the climate as being something that is universally affecting the whole planet. So you get so again, that should be something. So, part of me, I'm happy to, put my hands up and confess. When I see Michael Gove talking about banning plastic, part of me is like, well, I wish it wasn't you doing it.
I wish you didn't have to keep saying, and we will be faster than if it was the EU. So, right. Yeah. It's like, can you just say the thing without trying to attach a load of fucking bullshit to it?
but it's like, I don't want it to be him that fixes, but I have to keep that in my inside voice and just be glad that there's plastics getting the right kind of attention. So, so there are some issues like that again need to be removed away from the sort of
politics,
this kind of like they did it, we did it, let's agree. It needs to be done. Put your differences aside and sort your shit out.
So much blaming, isn't there? It's just such a culture of, it's just every debate, like whenever you kind of tune into that, it's just blame this, that. This was that person's fault. This was, Jesus, grow up. Like, do you want, what are you doing here? Are you trying to limit your liability? Or are you trying to get something done, for the love of God?
Yeah, we've got, I'm very lucky in my local politics, in terms of at local level and at MP. So Caroline Lucas is my MP, and I've got a brilliantly active local councillor called Emma Daniels, who, frankly, she's all over everything. She's extremely active, extremely engaged, responsive, doing exactly what a local politician should do, I think, and more probably. And we've got a few of them around Brighton. She's mine, so she gets a mention. But I'm really lucky that she's visible in the community, unless Facebook is really tricking me.
Well, who knows? Like, if you're going by that, then.
Well, I see her all over the shop, turning up.
And did you also see that like things about synthesizers all the time? Do you feel like the world is just absolutely filled to the brim with people doing stuff on synthesizers?
Yes, I do actually. That is my reality as well as yours.
Donald Trump is a triumph of the democratic process. People saying, oh, this guy sort of thinks like me. I'd like him to represent me. He's like me. And he's also like a much better version of me because, look, he's rich. that's what it's supposed to do. But
Yeah.
just like he's just got there through a triumph of weird marketing and sort of superficiality coming from kind of being a TV celebrity, and this is what happens when it's all about people's perception of you and absolutely nothing about the actual substance of anything about you.
Well, I've actually got my feet up on my chair and I've curled up into a ball. I'm like,
well, you're like, well, what can we do then?
Want to do. But this goes back to voting on badges, doesn't it?
No, it goes back to he's speaking he's speaking my mind. I would like him to speak my mind to it's that. It's like he is the avatar of like what a lot of people are like. So is that what we're in for if more people start voting? Like
we might have to go through, on the subject of a long game, at least everyone's paying attention to politics now, even if we wish they weren't.
I mean, this is what's going to happen. Like,
but it's, let's be optimistic. It's going to correct itself. We've got them all in and now they're going to see the consequences.
Well, hopefully, or, there's going to be so much information and misinformation overload and yelling of fake news that, like, nothing makes sense anymore and there's no kind of, like... It means that stuff is out in the open that used to be very niche and getting kind of argued with, hopefully, by more and more people.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got this weird now combination of technology changes meeting democracy. I saw one of my former bosses, in fact, shared a video on LinkedIn the other day, and it had, Barack Obama's face and mouth moving, and someone else, and his voice, but saying things that he would never say. And he shared this, and it was like, and he commented that it's always been true that you need to read 2 or 3 sources of information or news items. You don't just read one paper and take it as gospel. I mean, we used to joke when the war in Yugoslavia started, we were living here and we had satellite TV, so we literally had Russian news, German, French, Hungarian, every news, because my father just watched the news or listened to the news all the time, but we had it in multiple languages. Because he was that kind of a person and knew a few. And then he'd go, because, you watch one news report, it was like 10,000 bombs, and the next one, 5,000 bombs, 3,000. If you watched enough different countries' news channel, there was no war. It's like, and so you kind of got to take the mean of all of them and work out what's actually going on, or think about the motivations of the person who's telling you the story, or what their biases are. And, it's just that we seem to have somehow we've started believing everything. Why do we do that?
Oh, well, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It's that we've got to the point where we're, when we were young, there wasn't that much information to be had on a daily basis.
No.
You sort of had to go out and find it. And we've transitioned into this absolute information overload. It's coming from every direction. And I think a lot of people, like, when you look at comments, no one feels underinformed. Now, they feel like they've looked at loads of stuff. They feel like they've found, like, these things that refute the kind of knowledge, the general kind of consensus. Like, just as a case in point, Owen Jones posted this thing about let's make Donald Trump's visit on the 13th of July a carnival against hatred. And so the first thing I did, I haven't seen what he actually says, and I think, but it sort of makes me think, I think that you've got to, like, fight hate with love, haven't you? You've got to just kind of try and be good. But I kind of went straight down to the comments, and what you see is, first one you get, I agree, let's have a big party, blah, blah, blah. For those of us, can we go? Then we go, then you get sort of people trolling a little bit. Then we get, and yet it will inevitably be a demonstration of hatred. Probably a fair point. There was lots of people saying, well, what about when Obama proposed a wall with Mexico in 2009?
You see this all the time, this... I attack your dad, and then you tell me my dad was... Well, your dad wasn't any better than my dad. It's like, well, actually, we're not talking about that, because that's how people are behaving. It's like, if you say something against Theresa May, somebody would tell you that Jeremy Corbyn is a terrorist who's against Europe and blah, blah. And it's like, if you could move the conversation away from, is Jeremy Corbyn a bigger terrorist than Theresa May is cruel. You know, like, okay, that's not... Let's debate whether or not he's a terrorist separately. What I want to talk to you about is a government with a hostile immigration policy, or whatever they call it, who's, you know, deporting British citizens and then waiting till they're deported so that they can appeal. Let's debate that and not make it about Theresa May. Let's make it about whether that's right or wrong, whether we agree with it, whether we think it's a good idea. It's like, you know, saying that Trump did something, but Obama did. That's okay. Even if that's true, I don't know how that's, or even if I accept that's true. Yes, okay, that's true. Now I've accepted that. Can we part that? Now let's talk about the thing that's relevant now.
Yeah, well, so I was thinking, to respond to that is saying, you know, what relevance does that have to this conversation about Trump?
Yeah, you're trying to switch it instead of respond.
Well, I just think, like, you've got to ask, maybe, and then maybe... I'm just trying to, like, think, like, how do we actually... This is a different conversation, but how do you actually, like, sort of change that person's mind? The trouble is, like, no one seems to be their best selves in this situation either. So I kind of look, and then someone's, like, posted up a picture of a wicker man burning, saying a traditional British welcome awaits him, and then the next comment is typical lefty hate, sounding more like a terrorist every minute. Your mayor would be proud, scumbags. And it's like, okay, like, it's like there's plenty of fodder to kind of like react against.
But I think that's why, one of the reasons why I'm gonna, you know, when I tweeted back to Donald Trump, one of the reasons why I was really, really polite and respectful was because I think it's really, really important to be polite and respectful when you're saying something to somebody with whom you fundamentally disagree and who you do think, I have a very low opinion of the man. If I hadn't been polite, the conversation on my Twitter feed would have been completely different to the one that it was. And I actually got very little abuse, relatively speaking, considering what I did. And do you know what I mean? It's like, if you're going to be... it's when people sound like they're in the playground, then we all resort to behaving like we're in the playground. If you go, but Jeremy Corbyn's a terrorist, and it makes all of us just go, because that's what it's...
Well, it's responding emotionally, isn't it? It's kind of like, obviously we feel like, I'm furious about all of this, but like... and it's just too easy to just say stuff when you're emotional, and then everything just escalates and gets out of control.
Well, no, we have this thing in my family where my brother, sister and I were taught how to behave in a social environment. You know, let's say there's a party, you know, the Myatt's children can work a room. None of us particularly like it. So we have this almost ritual, especially me and my sister, where before we've got to go somewhere we don't want to go, we have a real bitching session. And then she's going to say this, and I don't want to eat that, and then I'm going to have to wear this. And we have a real, like, now we're going to be completely children. And then we turn up at the thing, hello, how are you? Oh, wow, that's... And then you can be your polite self. I'm not saying that you shouldn't get angry about these things, but the comment section on YouTube is not the place. You turn to your person next to you, you go down the shops, you're on a bus, talk to a stranger and just go, do you know what I just saw? And then go, oh, interesting, you should say that about Obama and the wall. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing. Anyway, back to Trump or whatever.
I did Google that and I couldn't find anything, by the way. Like, I was like, well,
maybe it was on Breitbart.
Probably.
I did see in the car, what was it yesterday? Yes, so I watched this Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall thing. Then I went to his Twitter feed and there were some comments, and obviously the second comment was, people should just have more self-control. If they don't want to get fat, they shouldn't eat as much sugar, was the one of the first things. And then somebody had said, well, you know, not everybody's in that position, And then he replied with a link to Breitbart. And I was like,
okay,
hello, okay, bye. I'm leaving Twitter. But Lydia and I, my sister and I were talking about this in the week. We were talking about in the context of all of us have a bit of privilege that we're not aware of.
Yes.
You know, and so being aware of your privilege is actually quite an important thing. I mean, guilty feminists go on about privilege a lot, and I'm a bit like, privilege. But it's true. It's like, I happened across a quote from Martin Luther King this week. It was a little video of him talking about the fact that they abolished slavery but didn't give the people anything. So to tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and sort their shit out when they haven't got any boots.
And they've stolen everything.
Everything from them. You know, ripped you out of your continent, made you work as a slave for 200 years, and then go, all right, you're free now, off you trot. What do you mean you've got no house? It's like, sort yourself out, work harder. This is America. Everybody can succeed. You know, it's just a bit... It's this sort of attacking people who, like, I think you were talking about this in a different context, but it's the same thing. It's like kindness is something that you bestow if you're in a more powerful or privileged position, really. It's the moment of not being cruel. Yeah. I don't know how this is relevant to democracy, other than, you know, if we're all a bit kinder, there might be a bit less cruel things like rape clauses in... So you can have you can have a third child on your tax credits if you can prove that the third one is a result of non-consensual conception.
And that's, oh my God, you people.
Can you imagine?
Like, can you imagine writing a piece of software like that? Like,
yeah.
What kind of bugs are you asking for with that? Like, oh my God. I was going to say, like, an ironic thing about, you know, I brought up that there's this lack of long-termism, but also we've complained about the lack of kind of agility and kind of ability to try things out and change things. So it's like, well, you know, which do you want? It's both too slow and too short-termist. So, I mean, is it just impossible? Like, is it just too hard? Do we need to defer to a higher intelligence? I mean...
Well, yes, maybe we do. It's time to bring back Jesus.
It's time to bring the AIs in.
But so there might be some interesting experiments. I never read about how it went or how it's going, but that sort of democracy OS idea where everybody's involved in every decision. But
that's not democracy, is it? That's just, and I did think, like, okay, let people vote on more stuff, make it less of a rare thing, make my kind of like voice a bit of it's not just once every 5 years or, you know, year or whatever, in smaller things, make it about like involvement in smaller decisions. But and then I've said, like, then one problem with that then is, are people well informed? Is the media doing its job? But the other thing is that's not what democracy is it? Democracy isn't about giving every little decision to the populace. Democracy is about electing a representative who knows better than you, hopefully. But also understands you and empathizes with you. So,
it's so difficult.
My latest futuristic idea for all this is that we do a lot more simulations, and we try and kind of... Because if you can simulate a policy, or if you can simulate like the long-term effects of something and speed it up, then I think you could learn a lot. And I don't know if there's any of that happening in government, but like you've got game theory, you've got ways of sort of like running it and just seeing what happens. And I'd like to see a bit more of that mentality coming in, and that used for persuasion as well, because it could get people a little bit out of that sort of, you know, the kind of, this is our, what do you call it, scale of perception, or like this is the sorts of things that we're biased towards noticing. If we can kind of study things in new ways. But I just think you never hear people using sort of any more sophisticated tools than, well, this is what I think. Well, I think this.
Government uses a lot of data, and they're trying to use data more cleverly. So, you know, you're starting to see projects around predictive analytics. There's all these problems around sharing data. Oh, it's very difficult. So simulations are difficult, I think, because of I'm not saying, I don't know enough about simulations and what it could tell you. But isn't that kind of again, going back to children, watching small children play, one of the reasons that it has to be supervised by adults is because they don't know all the things that can go wrong. They don't know that they can smack their heads on things, and if they jump up and down on the bed could break or whatever. Yeah. So because they can't play, they've not got enough experience to play out enough scenarios. I just think everyone should play more chess.
This comes back to, I think you can learn a lot from, I think, like, I find games, like computer games and other kinds of games, like an underestimated source of kind of wisdom. You can learn a lot from a game. You can learn about the sort of stupendous distances of space. And then there are games about sort of democracy where you can actually play out different scenarios with, either kind of, other humans or like computer characters, and just like try out, like, let's try this sort of campaign, let's try this sort of thing, let's like see what comes together. And something I thought, I don't know if this is something we will ever do, but I thought, like, there's two games that I've thought of as we've been talking. One was that sort of web-based game where it shows the effects of the media and the sorts of things that work in the media. I don't know if you ever clicked on that, but that really kind of helped you internalize why things are kind of like that. But another one, we were talking about empathy in in government last week, and kindness. There's a game called Papers, Please, where basically the aim of the game is people want to come into the country and you stamp them or you don't. And it just implicitly, you kind of start out wanting to kind of be kind to everyone, and then as time goes on, because the pressure's on you and the way you're being measured and your family's needs and things like that, the sort of corruption just naturally comes in, just from the nature of the situation. And I thought it might be interesting at some point to maybe just kind of play through, like do a little live stream and just play that through and sort of discuss what we're kind of learning from it, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in these games. But yeah, that's just something I was thinking about.
That's why playing is so. I know.
Well, that's what children are doing. Is they're simulating
all the
reality.
Time. Yeah. They're playing things, and then that's solving problems, and that's what they do, and that's why playing is so important for small children. And
then we stop, and then we have to go on like organised business things where everyone has to like play again, and but play, we should continue like playing out this simulation. Maybe we should, instead of calling it playing, we should call it simulating, and kind of try and actually devote a lot more time to doing that, and like spotting what are the good simulations that everyone should have tried, i.e. which games should you have play. It's not just watching a film now. It's like you can really internalize a problematic mechanic, like kind of an immigration policy, by just kind of being that immigration officer and seeing what the pressures are just by having it happen to you.
Well, everybody, thank you for listening to our podcast.
If you like it, you can find us. We've got a website, grandpodcast.com. We're on Twitter, Podcast Grand. We're on Facebook, and we're on, if you can drop us some reviews and stuff on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever the heck all these podcasts are. YouTube now is up.
Yeah, YouTube's up.
Got all the episodes are up on YouTube now, with nice thumbnails. Looks quite nice. I'd recommend visiting. Where can we find you, Ivanka?
You can find me at Ivanka on Twitter.
Okay, cool. And you can find me. I'm a narcissistic person who wasn't given enough sort of like attention as a child, so I'm a musician. So that's why my website is michaelforrestmusic.com, and I would love it if you would come and just, have a listen to something. Have a play of a video. Got lots of projects. Is there anything else? Is there, the votes are still open, aren't they?
Oh yeah, the votes are still open. BritishPodcastAwards.com/vote.
Come and vote for us. Search for Ivanka. You'll find us. Give us your vote and help us reach more people.
Using your democratic powers of voting.
Using your... we know you love voting. Everyone loves voting. I agree with one of these two arbitrary choices. But anyway, yes, thanks very much for listening, and hopefully see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.